Hello, my name is Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club Shocktober edition.
Oh,
pew, pew. It's me, Witch Hazel. I'm trying out some new voices. And this week, we are talking about the favorite hopping vampire series, also the one that actually started the entire trend or the way that it's presented in media today, Mr. Vampire.
That's right. Every year on Shocktober on the podcast, we like to talk about at least one horror franchise. We've burned through a lot of the ones that you know and love, your Nightmares, your Fridays, your Texas Chainsaws. So it's time to travel.
What about me, the Leprechaun?
We'll get to the Leprechaun one day. We are going to, again, every movie will be covered on this podcast at some point. But right now, we're traveling overseas, and I'd like to define our terms to begin with. You know, you hear a Chinese hopping vampire, and you think...
A Jiangshi.
Yeah, it's not really a vampire. Jiangshis are reanimated corpses. They're really more like zombies. They are dead, unthinking creatures who crave human blood, but are not seductive about it like Dracula is.
But if you throw the original Chinese title into Google Translate, it pops out, Mr. Zombie comes out. In Taiwan, it actually had a different title, and we'll talk about, especially the first one, that it was super popular in Taiwan and Japan, which has kind of made the franchise. The title was Hold Your Breath for a Moment, which is something that happens in the first movie to kind of get around these hopping vampires. And it's something, and we'll probably mention this a lot, that they created just for these movies and have been folded into just what we think of as hopping vampires. Now, because we're talking about something that is so culturally specific, we need to put the caveat, me and Will are two white guys who only know this information from the internet and the movies that we watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes without saying at this point, but maybe it's still worth restating. And Justin is saying that because he doesn't want you to write in with corrections and with telling us how to actually pronounce words and names.
Listen, if you tell me, all it will do will make me kind of like stop and take an extra 5 seconds when I have to say a name, and then I will just say it incorrectly anyway, probably finding a new way to say it.
So for a few years in the 80s, Chinese hopping vampire movies were all the rage. The first entry in the genre was Sammo Hung's Encounters of the Spooky Kind in 1980, but Mr. Vampire in 1985, which was produced by Sammo, was the real trendsetter. It spawned 4 official sequels and many imitators in a short span of time between 1985 and 1992.
Now, I should note that like the vampire in classic kind of Chinese context has existed since like forever in fiction, even showed up in movies in the 30s. And there's even kind of like slight variations. They ain't hopping though in the Shaw Brothers Hammer co-production, Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. But it wasn't until Encounters of the Spooky Kind that you get kind of like the rules, visual look, and aesthetic that would then be adapted and still continues to this day. So like in Encounters of the Spooky Kind, which is basically Sammo Hung doing a very Evil Dead-ish supernatural comedy, like a Looney Tunes-esque anything goes, throw everything at the wall, like, you know, there's morphing monsters, giant hands, and the vampire happens to just be one of them. And in the movie Encounters of the Spooky Kind, he shows up kind of the way that they would get away from it, which is like very oatmeal faced, very gray, and monstrous. Like oftentimes the vampires, when they're supposed to be portrayed in a threatening fashion, have like smoke coming out of their mouth.
In the Mr. Vampire series and the films that imitate them, the vampires have rigor mortis. So they all stand upright with their arms extended, and they hop because they can't bend their joints. They're very pale, they have long fingernails, and crucially, their vulnerabilities are, you know, they can't detect people when they hold their breath. So, you know, you plug your nose when you're around them and the vampire will stand there, not notice you. And also, if they make
now, does that only happen in the first movie? I don't think it happens in the other ones.
No, it's in Mr. Vampire 2 as well.
Oh, it is? Okay.
I believe so. In that fight scene. Sorry, I've watched 4 of these in like a short span of time, and now they're all blurring together. I mean,
the main thing is that you can put a piece of parchment paper, yellow, on their their head with a kind of incantation written on it, and that'll stop them dead in their tracks. That is consistent with any hopping vampire movie.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I've watched so many of these movies in such a short span of time that I'm starting to now forget which was in which. And particularly confusing is the fact that the 5 official Mr. Vampire movies, some of them don't actually have vampires in them. Some of them have other supernatural
I'm going to correct
elements.
you there, Will. There's actually only 4 official Mr. Vampire movies. Mr. Vampire 1992 is not a Golden Harvest production. It is a Golden Princess production.
Okay, wait, hang on a minute though. Mr. Vampire 1992, to add to the confusion, the 5th and final...
It has all the stars from Mr. Vampire number 1.
It's the only one that has all the stars from the first Mr. Vampire and has the same director, and they're basically playing the same characters.
That is the wonderful world of Hong Kong cinema where, listen, we're pumping movies out so fast, maybe we can confuse people. Does it really matter if it's an official entry or not? Not really. Because, like, as we'll get into it, like, after the Mr. Vampire film, the next year, there was a film called New Mr. Vampire that featured a lot of the same cast from the first one. That was not a Golden Harvest production.
Okay, so what unites the movies, though, and this includes most of the imitators as well, like Magic Cop or Close Encounters with Vampire, or...
I'm going to be the correction guy in this one. Magic Cop does not feature any hopping vampires in it.
Okay, well, neither does Mr. Vampire 3.
Mr. Vampire 3, yes.
But, you know, it's part of the wave. I mean, what unites them, I mean, if vampires don't unite all these movies, what do unite them are, most of them, again, not all, but most of them star a man named Lam Ching Ying, who, if you've seen any Hong Kong action movies, you've seen him. He's in seemingly every famous movie. He started as a stuntman, eventually became a beloved supporting player and sometimes star. You'll know him because he has a kind of a pinched face.
Well, also his nickname, the One-Eyebrow Priest. And that's how people usually call them when he shows up in all of these supernatural movies. He plays a Taoist wizard, I guess.
Yeah,
and that's
a priest.
Usually leading 2 bumbling sidekicks. Now, the sidekicks, they can change. They can be played by multiple actors throughout the films. Sometimes they're played by the brother of the actor in the first one, like in Mr. Vampire 4, where instead of the co-star of Mr. Vampire number 1, it's his brother, Chin Kar-lok. It's like, oh my God. All of these, like, I made so many notes on this that are basically gibberish to anybody reading, where it's like, just show me the hopping vampires. Is it fun? And I have to say, the first Mr. Vampire movie, I think, is super fun. I think it does something that the other ones don't, which is it's kind of threatening in the way that it uses the vampire.
Right. Mr. Vampire from 1985 is, I think, like, basically a perfect movie. It's on the shelf next to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in terms of great horror comedies. And crucially, and you alluded to this, it's great because the vampires really are a threat. Like, they are unstoppable killing machines, and they're also, even though they have rigor mortis, even though they just, like, hold their hands out, they are unbeatable kung fu fighters because they don't have a brain. They're just moving forward.
Now, we should specify, there is technically no martial arts in these movies, but it's just like using these martial arts skills that these men had just beaten into them, probably at most of the Peking opera schools that they went to, that you get all of these wild acrobatics and physicality. And what's fun about these Mr. Vampire films is that there are like certain rules that the vampires need to work within, like the fact that they don't really move so much. Their arms are always outstretched and like they can basically just hop. And what kind of physical, funny, slapstick, kinetic set pieces can you build out of that? I would say that the first Mr. Vampire is interesting because there's not that much vampire in it. The vampires show up at the beginning, and then later on, Yung Hua shows up as the vampire, and I think he's in 2 scenes. But both of them play like, oh my God, this vampire is going to kill us. We need to hide. We need to hold our breath. And it's just probably the music that they put under it too. It's the tone that it's hitting. It's like do 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 do, as opposed to like the do 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 in all the other Mr. Vampire films.
Well, the stakes are very important in the fight not the fight, the action scenes in Mr. Vampire, because in a normal fight scene, if the villain lands a blow, it's a temporary setback. If a vampire lands a blow, by which I mean he bites the person, it's game over. So every move has consequence.
I believe that Mr. Vampire is also the one that started this, a vampire bite will infect you and turn you into a vampire thing.
You mean Bram Stoker didn't start that?
Well, in this one, it's more of an infection thing, kind of like a zombie,
Right.
and that you slowly transform into one. In the case of the first Mr. Vampire, Ricky Hoy of the Hoy Brother comedy team, looking permanently like a 60-year-old man, and like he's in this early one from 1985, and when he shows up later on in 1992, recast in the role of the bumbling sidekick, you're like, oh, don't make this poor man do this. In this first one, the plot is basically Lam Ching-ying is a priest. He has two bumbling sidekicks. They have to get involved with moving someone's burial site, and stuff goes wrong. And so I would also say that the first Mr. Vampire film, it's the most cohesive one, that there's like kind of one story with the same group of characters that you can follow throughout. That is not the case with all of these movies. I also really like in the first one, all of the kind of supernatural things they have to do to keep the vampire in place and protect themselves. And it's like very convoluted, and they also take their time with it. Later on, when people would do this kind of hopping vampire stuff, they would just kind of do it in the moment. Like, for example, Magic Cop, where just all this wild, craziness doesn't matter if it, makes sense when you think about it. It just needs to make sense in the moment. And I kind of like this is scary. Let's really take our time with it and make sure that, we protect ourselves from this walking corpse.
Well, most of the Hong Kong pop cinema at the time didn't have completed shooting scripts,
No.
In fact, sometimes they didn't even have completed funding before they started. They'd shoot like 10 minutes and then they'd attract more investors from that 10 minutes and then keep going. With this one, you're right, it does feel like a coherent plot in the sense that the stakes are established early on and a certain set of characters are established, and then the situation accumulates. Like when the Ricky Hoy character gets bit and he spends so much of the movie trying to hide his increasing vampiric infection, rapidly cutting his fingers or trying to make it look like his pale face is because he's decided to put on makeup. There's a comic accumulation to that creates a sense of momentum that carries the whole movie forward. Whereas a lot of the sequels, I love the sequels, but they're kind of they're a little slapdash. It's a little bit.
Well, it's kind of like three movies squished together. Mm-hmm. And I say this, if you watch Mr. Vampire now, coming fresh, having not seen any of the other ones, you'll probably go, wait a minute, but there's a whole subplot with a ghost woman, and that doesn't really have anything to do with. I'm like, well, that's really close to the main plot compared to some of these other movies like Mr. Vampire 2, which is a quickie sequel that was rushed in less than a year into theaters, mostly because, number one, it was a huge hit. Number two, the imitators, specifically from Taiwan, were already popping up like mushrooms all over the... I could not believe how many hopping vampire films came out in 1986. It is bananas.
So Mr. Vampire 2, which doesn't have the greatest reputation, which surprised me because I loved it. I thought it was really fun. I loved all these movies, by the way. They're so full of just entertainment, even the worst of them. And the worst one I've seen is probably Mr. Vampire 1992. It's the acrobatics are still just insane.
Well, the thing about Mr. Vampire 2 is it put a curse on this whole genre by introducing one thing, the kiddie vampire, which, oh man, did especially Taiwanese producers run with. There are 4 official Mr. Vampire films in Hong Kong. There's a series in Taiwan called Hello Dracula that has 5 movies in it and multiple rip-offs and spin-offs. And it's all kiddie hey, I'm a kid vampire. Can't you treat me in an E.T. style way?
Right, so that's basically what happens in this one. It's set, unlike the first Mr. Vampire, in the modern day, set in 1980s Hong Kong, where a team of architects accidentally unleash a family of vampires. And the child vampire ends up getting sort of adopted by just a kid sister in Hong Kong who hides him in her closet. Now, and this little child vampire ends up being ingratiated into the kids' little kids social circle and going on wacky adventures, ends up becoming almost fully domesticated and not a vampire kid at all. And I actually kind of loved this subplot.
The way you're describing it makes it sound so much more coherent than it really is, because you spend 30 minutes with 3 characters that once the half-hour point hits, you do not see them for another 75 minutes. You spend 30 minutes with the kid vampire, kind of, ingratiating with the other kids. And then we follow Lam Ching-ying, Yung Bi-yu, and Moon Lee completely different characters doing something else.
Right. So, well, not Yuan Biao, but Lam Ching-yi and Moon Lee were in the first movie. They're now playing new characters, but they're basically playing like versions of the characters from the first movie. It's more a kind of spiritual sequel than an actual sequel. The fight scene halfway through, or not the fight scene, the action scene.
It's the best one. You talk about the Yoon Bi-yu one where there's slow motion gas that escapes and they all have to move in slow motion.
I mean, it's so funny. And like people think that this is one of the kind of lesser ones, but I mean, just so many scenes have just so much imagination, so much kind of Looney Tunes energy. The idea of having these three actors like pretend to be doing slow motion in a fight scene is just so funny.
And all the different variations that they find within this concept. And then you also have bone-breaking stunts of like poor stuntmen dressed as vampires being thrown into walls and then landing on tables that just explode underneath them. People need to understand these movies are all choreographed by the Sammo Hung stunt team. So you get that brutal, we need to see the hits for real happening in this film.
And like I say, I mean, Mr. Vampire 2, you know, there are so many scenes in it that just have a kind of pure cinema energy to them. I'm thinking of that scene where, you know, the mother and father vampire, who are more mindless than the child vampire, are sort of like hopping from police car to police car and
there's just explosions all around them as they're doing it. It's just a beautiful sight to behold.
And then the last scene, which is kind of like a showdown between the vampires and the SWAT team, and then Lam Ching-yi comes in and, you know, there's like rocket launchers and stuff. I mean,
this is the one where like the vampire at the end turns into a mush man, doesn't he? Because he like bursts out of the house and he's like, oh. Or am I confusing that with, that also happens in Mr. Vampire 3.
Well, in Mr. Vampire 3, there's a kind of like deep fried
monster.
Yeah. Well, why are we talking about Mr. Vampire 3, which is the kind of like Halloween 3, the season of the witch of the series, where there are actually no vampires in it. It's
no vampires.
We're back to a period setting. This one stars Richard Eng, the prolific Hong Kong comedian, one of the lucky stars. He plays a charlatan, a phony ghost hunter.
A frightener, if you will.
That's right. But he accidentally invokes real powers, as so often happens in movies like this.
Well, he uses two ghosts to pretend to haunt places, then he can capture those ghosts. That's literally the plot of the Peter Jackson film, The Frighteners.
He summons this evil witch, played by Pauline Wong, who's also in the first movie as the sort of succubus character. And
like these actors like Pauline Wong, like once you get popular in a role, for example, playing a ghost, you will be a ghost in every other movie from then on out. Happened to Joey Wong, the star of A Chinese Ghost Story. And it even happened to actors in the Mr. Vampire series. Like, I think it's Billy Lau plays a cop in the first one, and he shows up in multiple vampire films as just cop. Because it's like people are like, that's who we want to see, the cop guy.
Now, we're sort of reaching like the wall of my ability to talk about these movies coherently, because by the time you get to Mr. Vampire 3, it's kind of a series of scenes sort of connected. I mean, there is a plot in this movie, but
Lam Ching-ying is still here.
That's right. He ends up being the sort of like, well, he's a Taoist priest again, who the Richard Eng charlatan character calls on to help him deal with the evil forces. But like, in this movie, you've got a series of scenes. What was that definition? Was it Howard Hawks' definition of a great movie? 3 great scenes, no bad scenes. Well, this has probably got 6 great scenes in it.
Yeah, like the thing about this movie is it's weird it's called Mr. Vampire 3. Again, no vampires, but like the villains are basically evil wizards that they fight. There's ghosts too, but mostly their main threat are wizards that like tons of special effects, like faces growing, as we previously mentioned, a deep fried monster that shows up that gets his eye ripped out in like a really gory way. You also have a kid ghost. I believe it's the same kid from Mr. Vampire 2, one of those kids that like acted in 5 movies in half a year and then like went away to be a fireman.
Before we talk about Mr. Vampire 4, what were some of the other movies in the series? I know you watched Vampire versus Vampire. What is the relationship of that to the main series?
It is a Golden Harvest film, so technically it's kind of a Mr. Vampire film. I mean, Sammo, his name was on a lot of the kind of supernatural films like Spooky Spooky, for example. There was actually a Lam Lam Ching-ying starring supernatural comedy that came out a year before Mr. Vampire called Hocus Pocus. But it doesn't really have the hopping vampire that we all know and love. But it's kind of like he's figuring out his way, and like from 85 to basically like 90, like there's so many that are coming out, and they're just trying to pump them out as fast as possible. Some of them that only last in cinemas for like 3 days, supposedly. There's an interesting kind of like parallel universe hopping vampire film called Abracadabra that came out in 1986, I would recommend. That's like a bunch of people in like a modern day mall that opens a portal to hell filled with vampires. And it's weird to see like, oh, that's not kind of the classic way we think of them, because it's everybody's figuring out their own way. Another example of that is Ronnie Yu's The Trail, which I was very surprised to see actually came out in 1983. So that's like after Encounters of the Spooky Kind, where you get, you know, okay, this is a scary hopping vampire, but before Mr. Vampire comes out, where you kind of, you know, set that template in stone. So in The Trail, the gimmick is we didn't even mention like what people use the hopping vampires for. Usually it's priests that bring them like across the countryside, and you can make them hop in a line, and you can bring them, I think, to the gravesite if you want something that is more like lucky, or the feng shui is better. But anyway, in the Ronnie Yu film The Trail, the hopping vampire is the scariest thing in the world. That like if you see it, you're gonna get killed. There's no martial arts scene in the movie. It's basically like a bunch of like priests that are trying to capture this vampire and being killed one by one. And to add that dissonance, it's still kind of comedic, and Ricky Hoy is in it before he would take on the role in Mr. Vampire.
It might be worth mentioning, I don't think we've quite got this point across, that all of these movies are incredibly childish and vulgar. I mean, most of them have like really like lame bathroom comedy and, you know, really like horny sex jokes. And
Wait, are you describing every popular entertainment to ever come out of Hong Kong from 1985 to
and I mean, I'm saying this with love. You know, if
the Wong Jingification of Hong Kong entertainment.
You know, yeah, if you can get a sort of flatulent ghost, then you've got yourself.
I mean, I love it. I'm laughing already.
You've got yourself a Mr. Vampire
I think
movie.
Mr. Vampire 2 has like a non sequitur gag where a gorilla runs out of a cave after someone. No, I think wait, which one is it? Anyway, very funny when that happens.
So I don't know if you had a chance to watch Mr. Vampire 1992. It's anything but
I did.
Oh, okay. It's not essential viewing. Did you? Well,
we're skipping Mr. Vampire 4
okay,
too.
We'll get to
one.
Mr. Vampire 1992 in a minute. I'm just so eager to talk about it. But yeah,
I know.
Mr. Vampire 4 is the only one in the series that doesn't star Lam Ching-ying. His part is, well, his sort of role is instead essayed by Anthony Chan,
a member of the Winners Band, the very popular Hong Kong pop group. And Anthony Chan had a similar role in the first Mr. Vampire. He kind of bookends the movie, where he shows up, he takes the hopping vampires to like make them travel, then he comes back right at the end, and he's kind of playing that character in Mr. Vampire 4.
The movie is basically, the human plot is about a feud between two rival spiritualist neighbors. The Anthony Chan character is a Taoist. The Wu Ma character is a Buddhist. They're both rival priests / Ghostbusters, but they eventually have to work together to stop the hopping vampire invasion.
I enjoyed this one, especially if you watch them from 1 to 4, because it's like, we're going back to basics. Mm-hmm. We just have a super vampire in this one that everybody has to take on and fight, that really wants to kill you and is gray-skinned.
Well, yeah, coming after Mr. Vampire 3, which is without a doubt the wackiest of the series, a one that's like not really horror at all, is purely about like sort of, you know, Richard Eng's bare ass and like, you know.
Yeah, lots of Looney Tunes gags as well.
This one like reestablishes the vampires as a threat. And so it sort of works. I mean, I wouldn't call any of these movies scary exactly, but but some of them, like the first one and the fourth one, have the sort of charge of like there's a real threat here.
Like, this thing is going to kill me. And I really like that. Like, there's not too much to say about Mr. Vampire 4 because it is so like basic and straightforward, but man, watching it and just remembering like reading like Hong Kong movie review sites back in like the mid 2000s, they're like, this is the worst one. So lazy, bad. Then you watch it and you're like, boy, I wish any movie that came out of anywhere had like 1/10 of the energy and invention that this does.
If this movie, you know, if Mr. Vampire 4 came out this year, it would be considered like the best action movie of the decade.
Probably. And I mean, it sounds like we're hyping it up, up, which we are, but they just don't make movies like this anymore. And that's a real bummer that they don't. But maybe it's better that, all these children didn't have to be abused for 5 years in schools by masters that broke their bodies.
So I didn't revisit Mr. Vampire 1992, which comes at the very end of the cycle.
It's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. But like the hopping vampire cycle basically lasted from 1985 to 1992. And then after 1992, there were basically no more there were like 1 million in those years, and then none again until like the 2000s.
Do you know that they're still being made, directed by Ricky Lau, who directed all 4 movies that we mentioned, all 5 movies we mentioned today? This poor man is like, please don't make me direct hopping vampire movies. Like, sorry, buddy, you got to do vampires now. And I only watch one of them. And the thing is, you can't do ghosts and goblins in Chinese mainland blockbusters. So it's revealed to just be Scooby-Doo fakers in the movie. And like, if he's done multiple, are they all fakers in every one of the movies that he's done? What a hell to live in. But okay, so give us, I know you just want to talk about the plot of Mr. Vampire 1992.
Well, because it's fucked up. I mean, it's the movie that reunites the cast from the first movies. You got the same priest, you got the same 2 bumbling assistants, but they are fighting the like reanimated spirits of aborted fetuses.
And they even say, like, they're angry because they got aborted.
Right. Now, you hear that, and you think, my God, what a hideous premise for a movie. The movie is 99% lame comedy.
Lame. I mean, the fetuses do possess a pregnant woman and then control her to try to kill everybody else.
Yeah, that's kind of funny, I guess. I mean, so the scene in this movie that's burned in my memory, did you see this scene when you were watching it? A little, like, demon baby, like, who's like, 3 years old or something, pulls out his little dick and like pisses on one of the heroes.
That is within the first 7 minutes of the movie, and that is followed up with that same demon baby grabbing the dick of another character and stretching it like Laffy Taffy before letting it snap back.
So I'd completely forgotten that. This is unsimulated.
Maybe because you blacked out when the kid is pissing on the guy, and then it cuts to just a naked kid pissing. like
actually,
nothing to the imagination. Actually.
So that's the scene. I mean, I saw this movie. Yeah, this is one of those movies that I like got from the bargain bin when I was a teenager. And, much like Mr. Bernstein and that girl that he only saw once, but I bet a month never went by that he never thought of that girl. I bet a month has never gone by when I didn't think of that kid pulling in his little dick and pissing on a guy in Mr. Vampire 1992.
Man, those 90s movies, up until Stephen Chow's like King of Comedy, there was so much kid pissing. And like, they just show the kid too.
Okay. Like, Stephen Chow's King of Comedy has a scene where there's like a little, like, he's 4 years old, a little boy.
Yes, and Stephen Chow takes a stick, doesn't he? And
he literally starts
like,
playing with the kid's dick, like, for real. Yeah. Okay.
I feel bad talking about this. We need to move on.
Because I never hear anybody talk about this. I never hear anybody talk about this, and it's right there. It's insane.
So, Mr. Vampire 1992, yeah, like Will said, that's pretty much like the nail in the coffin of the official. I mean, Lam Ching-ying will continue to play the one-eyebrow priest. He had a series on TV in 1995, but then unfortunately a couple of years later, he passed away from cancer. At the age of 44 years old, that's how young he was when he passed away. But he made 100 movies in that from when he was able to until, it was all over. You saw Rigor Mortis, right? The like Poe-faced serious take on Mr. Vampire?
I actually never did. It came out in the early 2010s. It was like, a mainland Chinese blockbuster, basically. There was
it's a Hong Kong film.
Oh, okay. It was a revival of the hopping vampire concept. And I never saw it because it looked kind of dreary, to be honest.
Dowy. It is, but what's amazing about it is it has all of the actors from these movies. Some of them, like Ching Soo Ho, who's in Mr. Vampire 1992 and the first one, playing himself as a washed-up actor who used to be in hopping vampire movies.
Incredible.
It's also got Anthony Chan, like we mentioned, who plays the kind of like priest figure in the movie. Kara Hui, Richard Ng is in there too. Billy Lau, the cop from these movies. And they're all broken down, just beaten individuals living in a giant J-horror style apartment building that is then attacked by a hopping vampire.
So the first 4 Mr. Vampire movies, plus Encounter of the Spooky Kind and Vampire vs. Vampire, are on the Criterion channel right now. Well,
that's
worth
wild.
watching.
I mean, Yeah, that should be, if you haven't seen them, definitive this season watching. And if you want to go and explore, Sammo Hung, like I said, did a lot of other supernatural films. It's really diminishing returns, like the late period Encounters of the Spooky Kind 2. Bad, not good.
Gambling Ghost. You ever see that one?
Oh, yes. Well, Gambling Ghost, isn't that a Chu Yang Ping movie?
Oh, no. I know that one you're thinking of. You're thinking of King Swindler.
Yes, King Swindler. Sorry, I'm thinking of all the films that Sammo Hung seemingly made because he had gambling debts that he had to pay off. There's another one where it's I think it's Sammo Hung's wife commits suicide and comes back as a ghost.
Oh my goodness. Ghost Punting?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Oh, well, Ghost Punting is one of the... There's so many. We can't even get into them. Maybe we'll do later on in the future all these Sammo Hung non-vampire related supernatural comedies.
I'd love to.
That's a franchise, right?
Yeah. Well, Justin, do we have any letters?
As per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And our first letter is from Mo, and he goes, no, sorry, it's not Mo from the Three Stooges, Will. I know you're very excited about that.
Aw.
They go, I'm a big fan of the podcast. You introduced me to the films of Matt Farley and Damon Packard, two auteurs whose work I enjoy and think about fairly often. I also recently dove into the films of Patrick Wang after listening to your episode, and boy, A Bread Factory really is just a phenomenal film. I was surprised that it didn't catch on in a way similar to the way Drive My Car did, since it's great in a way that really did remind me of a Hamaguchi film, while of course being its own thing. Yeah, I mean, Patrick Wang is probably asking himself that question all the time too, whereas why can't my films catch on? Will pointed out to me that our Patrick Wang episode probably got more traction than most of the things we've done lately.
Yeah, a lot of people shared it, and I think that's just because so few people have talked about, so few people have done a podcast on Patrick Wang. Anyway, I was just very happy to see a lot of people watching Patrick's movies. I was also happy to see that he heard the episode himself. He posted about it.
Yes. Or at least he listened to one of our episodes. He's like, I listened to your Samuel Phil episode. Very good. Maybe he didn't want to hear us talk about him, his stuff, which is understandable. So, but I appreciate Patrick for retweeting that. That's very appreciative, and I can't wait to see what he does next, because I hear from people that he is working on a new movie.
So does this letter writer have a question for us, or is just this compliments?
Yes, I'm getting to it. I was saying the letter continues. Lastly, I'm also part of my college's film club, where we try to watch one movie a week and have a discussion about it. So far, we've watched really wonderful variety of movies. I made a letterbox list, but I'm interested in filling in more blind spots. One topic that's a little contentious within the club has been slow cinema. I and a few other club members really enjoy the slower paced movies we've seen, but the reactions to them have been wide-ranging and made for some fascinating discussions. We've watched films by Gus Van Sant, Elephant, Chiming Lang, The River, and Chantal Ackerman, Jean Dillman. I know it's difficult to make recommendations for a group that you don't know anything about, but I was wondering if either of you had some suggestions for films that would make a good discussion topic. In particular, things that won't just end up with everyone sitting around a table agreeing that the movie is good. This has happened every time we've watched a Coen Brothers film. Anyway, thank you for the great podcast, and I hope you're all doing great. Mo. Emmanuel in America. Lorna the Exorcist.
A Cat in the Brain, the late period Lucio Fulci joint. No, okay, so talking about slow cinema, a movie that is probably a little bit too obvious and probably everyone's already seen, but I remember when I was, 15 or 16, it sort of changed my understanding of how a movie could be paced and why, is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now, again, a lot of your friends have probably seen it, but if you want to think about slow cinema, if you want to think about like when I saw that movie when I was in high school, and there's that scene where Eli Wallach just runs around the desert, or there's the standoff where it's just cutting back and forth between the three guys' eyes while the music swells. And, just the absurd length of the movie. Once Upon a Time in the West is obviously another great example that just has scenes that are drawn out beyond all reason. If you want to get people into slow cinema, I would maybe watch those movies, which are so fun and accessible, and maybe just talk a little bit about why do these movies work? Why is the choice being made to extend these scenes for so long? And what are the cinematic elements, from the music to the acting to the cinematography, doing that justifies this length? I don't know. That's what I would say.
I mean, if you want to really fill in any blank spots, and you want slow cinema that will not test a group audience too much. I mean, you got to check out the work of Abbas Kiarostami, because he's doing a lot of interesting thing, and also like what cinema can be. Like Taste of Cherry, 95 minutes, but it's slow. And so people may get frustrated, but that may lead to conversation about like, okay, but why is he doing it the way that he's doing it? And then something like Close Up is just like asking questions about what cinema is, what is representation, like what does it mean to tell these kind of stories. If you want to go more modern, that's like slow, but then we're getting into like very long stuff. You could check out Hubo's An Elephant Sitting Still. I really like that movie. It is very long, but I think it's slow in a way that there's a lot of kind of visual invention that you can discuss about it. I mean, now I'm thinking of all the slow filmmakers that it's like, oh, well, then you could watch this movie, The Traveling Players. We never did that director, right?
No.
I threatened him. Theodoros Angelopoulos. I really like his movies, and he uses slow cinema and long takes in really interesting ways, where he's like cutting through time in the same take, but without giving you any signifiers, so you just have to kind of figure it out as you're going. If you want to like get people in with like, oh, French New Wave, you guys know that, right? Jean-Luc Godard. Check out some Jacques Rivette, because he has, his films are slow, but they're also very eclectic. And I mean, Celine and Julie Go Boating, that's a movie with a lot to talk about. I'm sure somebody that watches it with you is going to be, what was that? That was nothing. But then that allows you to kind of discuss it. And for people that did like it, what did you like about it? And I mean, Celine and Julie Go Boating, that is, a gateway drug, of course, to the cinema of Jess Franco, because they actually use some of the same kind of aesthetic obsessions in their movies.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I definitely really feel like, Jess Franco, or whether it's Jess Franco or Antonioni or Claire Denis or all these people. Cotafavi, like you see something from the trash realm that might unlock something in the art realm, and then something in the art realm that might draw interesting connections back to the trash realm. Like, I do think these like two spheres work hand in hand.
Yeah, when you watch a Jess Franco film, and please don't show the group a Jess Franco film, especially if you've never seen one. Like, he's using techniques that Antonioni uses in his films too. It's just there's a lot more parts featured from Lena Romay in his pictures as opposed to Antonioni's films.
But yeah, I love your suggestions. I mean, like Close Up and Taste of Cherry are movies that like are seemingly very difficult, but that like lots of people love. They've become like beloved classics.
I saw that at Sinsu when they showed it on 35 millimeter one year. Loved it when they used to do that. Just the wildest 35 millimeter screenings that they could do because they could go to archives. Sinsu being the University of Toronto. They don't really do it anymore, and it makes me sad.
Oh, God. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, the Cinema Studies Student Union, they used to do 35 millimeter screenings every Friday, and I would always say, I'll do it for free. I'll do it another time. Because back then, all movies were on 35 millimeter. Didn't seem that special, did it?
Until James Cameron came around with Avatar, ruining it for everybody. Well, thanks for the letter. Hopefully there's some suggestions there, or at least things that maybe you want to explore a little bit more and discover if you think it would be good for the group. Did I ever say that I did once a screening society at Glendon University that lasted only 2 screenings?
What did you show?
Battle Royale and The Host. Just like, international films that are still kind of audience pleasing. I think we got 3 or 4 people, not that many. I befriended all of them that came, and we hung out together. The labyrinth of documents I had to write to like qualify as a group in the school was so much that I went, I don't want to do this. And then I just didn't. I don't think London had a screening society. I don't think they had ever had one when I started, and we lasted a whole 2 screening sessions, and that was it because of damn bureaucracy.
And then in the years since, you've had God knows how many screening societies, large and small, official and unofficial.
We're about to talk about one right after we finish this main episode. So next up, what are we going to be talking about for Shocktober? Maybe the most famous writer of all time, Will?
That's right. We are going to be doing an episode on Stephen King.
Now, I don't know for sure how we want to approach this yet. Will was like, maybe the bad Stephen King. And I was like, Will,
that's 80% of Stephen King movies.
That is so much. So what if we tried to do, and this is a big try, screenplays that Stephen King himself wrote. So those can be adaptations of his own work, but that if his name is in the screenwriting credits, then we can talk about the movie. Now, this will be an interesting episode because I'm a Stephen King fanatic. Was when I was a kid, probably read like 30 of his books. Will, I believe you've only read The Shining, right?
I've read The Shining and I've read On Writing, which doesn't count.
Great book. I like On Writing.
It's great.
A lot.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Oh, and I used to read his Entertainment Weekly column, The Pop of King.
Oh, we're going to talk about that? That was such an indication that Stephen King has terrible movie taste.
That's right.
Just the worst. But we'll talk about that next week. So look at what, if you want to know what we'll be watching, definitely Sleepwalkers, because I believe that was like a famous like original screenplay by Stephen King and was directed by Mick Garris. And then I was looking at like what else he wrote. He did some new ones recently, but I want to, they're bad. That's the problem. Is that like, they're not good. I believe his name is on Cycle of the Werewolf, which I think is it's called Silver Bullet when it was released. Cycle is the original calendar novel that it's based on. So maybe we'll be watching that too. But Stephen King, we're going to talk about next week. Will's going to read about 5 books, I think, before we talk about it. So you get like a real understanding of King. And so until next week, my name's Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank some of our new patrons who include Yenkum Terry, Logan Robert, Joran Thornton, Gamra Sanders, Brian German, Ariston Socrates, Jeff, Robbie Carroll, and Dom Sinicola. Thank you very much for becoming patrons. We could not keep doing this without you.
Well, folks, if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that Justin and I have hosted a screening series at the Fox Theatre in Toronto, a beautiful historic movie theater in the Beaches neighborhood. We've had 4 screenings so far. We showed Rumble in the Bronx, Hell's a Poppin', Glen or Glenda, and just this week we showed the 1989 Canadian direct-to-video horror classic Things.
Now, I've loved Things since I think I figured out it was like 2009, maybe even 2008, when I stumbled upon the filmmakers hawking their wares at Fan Expo. And I just stopped and went, what's this? And they're like, hey, we made an indie horror film. And I was like, okay, I'll buy it. And they all signed it. And then I went to the Trash Palace screening that night and I was like, what is this? I think maybe at the time I was like, this is bad. I don't like this. But then, like the virus that Things is, it haunted me. I just couldn't stop thinking. I showed everybody I knew Things. Like it for a while, it seemingly was playing nonstop in the basement apartment that I lived in when people visited.
Well, our friend Paul Carup, who writes the Canucksploitation blog, and who I think was one of the first people to really love Things, I remember him saying that, like, your first viewing of Things is sort of preparation for your real first viewing of Things. Like, you need to just get acquainted with it.
I think that one of the pioneers of Things studies was Robin Bougie and his Cinema Sewer article, which is like a multi-page article breaking down like this is why you need to watch Things with beautiful illustrations. And I think it was that article that actually kickstarted Barry J. Gillis and Andrew Jordan to put it back out on DVD after the VHS was like so rare, it was going for like tons of money.
So it's a basically 0 budget Canadian horror movie that was made by 2 guys in Scarborough, Gillis and Jordan, and it's sort of a haunted house movie. It's about a guy and his friend who go to like a house. I was going to say a cabin in the woods.
It's supposed to be in the woods, but it's actually a house just in Scarborough.
And there are things there. There are little beasts. And they're the result of a bad experiment gone wrong by the sinister Dr. Lucas. But none of what I said conveys the vibe of the movie.
You know what's interesting about that Paul Corup comment is I agree with it, but I think there's a way to fast forward your appreciation of Things, and that's to watch it with a big crowd.
Oh, yeah.
Because, man, does this movie play well with a crowd. Me and Peter Kaplowski showed it a couple of years ago at Laser Blast Film Society, and I was a bit reticent to show it because I was like, it's so slow. Like, is it just going to be, like, receive, like, awkwardness? Will people try to MST3K it? Like, how will this play with an audience? And I was shocked when we played it. It played like gangbusters. People were with it. They were laughing. And so when we did it at the Fox again, it played exactly the same way.
Yeah, and it's like we're trying to cultivate an atmosphere that is like, it's okay to laugh at these movies, but you have to also love them. And like, I know what that feels like when you're in the room. And there's something about this movie, like, it's been called the worst Canadian film of all time, which of course we vigorously disagree with.
Mr. Paul Gross's filmography, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, it's a sort of like accidental avant-garde movie it has a sort of Inland Empire vibe.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Countless bizarre artistic decisions and hilarious moments, but like you could feel the love in the room for the movie because there's something about the movie. The guys making it are so earnest, and there's such this like sweetness to it, and it also has this like guys getting together and goofing around and making a horror movie quality to it.
And it's also clearly supposed to be funny.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Like there's jokes in it, and the jokes, because they're sandwiched between things that, let's be honest, you knew they didn't want it to turn out that way, make them even funnier when you're watching it. This is a film that almost nothing happens in it. But like watching it like a week ago, I'm like, this is all killer, no filler. There's like a new joke every 30 seconds that I'm laughing my head off. Just a line reading of the movie starts with about 30 minutes of like three guys just hanging out in a living room, turning on lights, going up to a fish on the wall, tapping it and going, yep, that's plastic. And we had a blast, specifically because thank you so much for everybody that turned out. I think it may have been the biggest turnout of any of the screenings we've done up to now.
I was stunned we had such a good turnout, honestly. Yeah.
And also, thank you. Unprompted from us, two of the actors in the movie showed up to the screening and were nice enough to do a Q&A with us afterwards. The actors were Bruce Roach and John W. Pachul, who plays the legendary Dr. Lucas in this film, a character who only has 2 scenes and shows up right near the end of the movie and is like the big climax of the film.
It's like
line
Harry
delivery.
Lime, just the impact.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Every line, he's like, you're just a couple of Looney Tunes. And he's smiling through all of it. Like, what a delight that was. And I mean, the two guys, what a delight they were as well.
Oh, yeah. They came on stage with us. They answered questions. I mean, you could just feel the love in the room. The vibes were so good.
I was very surprised that, well, maybe not that surprised, but Jan seemed a little bit reticent about the movie. He's like, it's bad. I don't really like it that much. We learned basically that both of the guys are only in the movie because Andrew and Barry knew them as, respectively, Bruce owned a bunch of video stores and Jan owned basically all the equipment in a studio where they shot a bunch of the film, including the scene where a prostitute gets naked.
That's right. So Bruce, among his stores, he had an all horror store in the beaches called the
Video Gore Store, which I can find no reference to. All that I found is someone posted on Instagram a business card, but it's behind, like, locked. They have to accept you to follow them to be able to look at it. I'm like, no.
But it was a store that was open in the beaches for less than a year because, well, according to Bruce, there was a disgruntled rival video store owner who called the police on him because he was stalking movies that were banned in Ontario at the time. So Bruce spent a night in prison for stalking I Spit on Your Grave. Yeah, I'm telling you, I Spit on Your Grave, that dusty old relic.
And Bruce is interesting as well because he was kind of the missing link in this cast. In the movie itself, he disappears for like a huge chunk of it because he just wasn't available anymore. And yeah, now he's super appreciative and he's like, what a great, I mean, at one point I went up the aisle and he was sitting at the back and he just looked at me and gave me 2 thumbs up. And that's just surreal that like a movie I've seen like 50 times that the actors in the film were just like smiling, telling Bruce just all he wanted to do was tell stories, and he had a million of them too.
I mean, just on a personal level, I met Bruce just outside the theater and I brought him in, and when I saw your eyes, Justin, light up
when he came in,
yeah,
that's the guy. And they weren't sure. They're like, I don't know if Jan's coming or not. And he came and he brought a family member who, to say that she was unenthused would be polite, because I was like, hey, have you seen the movie? She's like, yeah, I've seen the movie. Well, parts of it. But watching it with that audience, afterward I talked to her and she's like, it is really fun. And it's like, yes, this is what we want to do. This is the perfect experience.
My goodness, Justin, when we started this podcast, lo those many years ago, did you ever dream that we'd be showing things to an appreciative audience and that actual cast members would show up? My God.
Absolutely never. What are we going to do next? Probably play a movie with no cast members for 2 years. But
yeah, probably.
It helped that they lived around us and commented on a Facebook post. And Will jumped on that and was like, oh, wait, we need to get in contact with these people and make sure that they come.
So yeah, we'll keep listeners updated about when the next Important Cinema Club Masterpiece Classic screening is.
It'll probably be in December, and it'll probably be holiday themed. And probably in the public domain, too, because a lot of those feature films
Let's make some money
within that sphere. Yes. We make no money when we show films we have to pay the rights for because, how many people does the Fox seat? Maybe 200? Let's fill those seats, 200 people.
We can do it.
They were very nice that they were like, oh, you can go a little bit extra. You have a Q&A, but Stop Making Sense is playing after this, and there'll probably be a bunch of people coming to this. Yeah. And I was like, oh, you're only playing it one night? They're like, nah, it's been playing for a week.
Boy, Justin, there's a lesson there. Show good movies that people like.
Yeah, well, or that people know, because we were showing a good movie on the night that we played
and
things.
Everyone liked it.
Oh, well, I just want, before I forget, how great was it to see the two actors swarmed by people who wanted autographs?
It was surreal, honestly, and like totally deserved. Yes. I was so happy to see it, but it's also wild. Like these two guys from Scarborough who made one movie 30 years ago were being treated like celebrities, as they should have been.
Should be.
Yes.